good evening, and welcome to our fifth installment of Courageous Conversations. I'm your host, Pastor Jamal, and I am excited about what God has been doing in these conversations that were sparked by two great leaders of our community, Bishop Hinton, pastor of Mount Pisgah Harnett, and Pastor Wagner, pastor of Central Baptist here in Dunn. And I think that it's only fitting that we jump right in tonight and just get into the good conversation we're going to have. We're delighted to have tonight's conversationalist. We're going to start with Ms. Marquita McCrimmon, who's Department Chair of Justice Studies at Central Carolina Community College. We are also blessed to have our sheriff here in Harnett County, Sheriff Wayne Coates. We also have Sergeant Charlene Cotton of the North Carolina Highway Patrol and Pastor John Fitzpatrick Jr., local attorney here. And so welcome to each of you. Excited that you have joined us here today. Pastor Fitzpatrick, if you would, could you begin with a word of prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you now in the name of Jesus. Thank you, O God, for this opportunity to come together with people who have influence in different areas of this life. We pray, O God, we'll be able to have some meaningful discussions and be able, Father God, to come together and remain together on one accord. We pray, Father God, that we'll be able to get some good insight and direction, that hopefully all those that hear will be able to recognize the importance of respecting one another, that we all are God's children. We just thank you, Father God, today just for the insight and direction that come forth in this place. We ask your Holy Spirit to lead us and guide us. Help us keep our mind stayed on you. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Fitzpatrick. Before we begin, we are honored to have the presiding prelate of the Cape Fear and Southwestern Free Will Baptist Conference, Bishop Clarida, and the Vice President, Bishop Wayne McCoy, and they would like to make a presentation at this time. So we ask them to come forward.
Thank you, Pastor Johnson. We're going to ask Sheriff Coates if he would please step forward. Sheriff Coates, the members of the original Cape Fear and Southwestern Free Will Baptist Annual Conference, we're indebted to you. We're indebted to you because of your support in our Parade for Justice and Equality. We just want to thank you for all that you did for us. It could not have been the success it was without your support, and you supported us from day one, and you did a lot of work, I know you did, behind the scenes. You made a lot of phone calls, and you know, you're one who can move people, and you got the movers and shakers together, and you made it happen. So we just want to tell you how much the members of our conference, how much we appreciate all that you did for our annual conference in the Parade for Justice and Equality. And at this time, Bishop McCoy is going to make a presentation.
Presented to Sheriff Wayne Coates and the Harnett County Sheriff's Department for your support and commitment to the Parade for Justice and Equality held on July the 11th. The members of the original Cape Fear and Southwestern Free Will Baptist Conference would like to express our deepest gratitude to you and your department for all that you did to assist in the planning of the parade. We also thank you for the services that your department provides to the citizens of Harnett County. May God continue to bless each of you, keep you safe, all that you do, and we are praying for you and your safety. Given this day, the 18th day of August of 2020, by Bishop Fred Clarida Sr., presiding prelate, Bishop Wayne McCoy Sr., Vice President, and Bishop Reginald Hinton, our President Emeritus. We thank you.
Thank you so much, and it was an honor and a privilege to be able to do it, but again, in everything that we do, it's because we all work together to make things happen. Bishop McCoy, Bishop Clarity, Bishop Hinton come sit down with me in the office. They told me what they wanted to do, and I think it was great, but I can't take credit for it. I worked just as you did, and it was a huge success, and it was just well planned, and thank you so much for this honor. I really appreciate it.
Amen. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Clarett and Bishop McCoy. That's awesome, and it was an awesome event. The foundation of these conversations has been and will continue to be biblical. And so I think it's important that we lay that foundation even as we talk tonight about law enforcement. We believe that the Bible and God ordains government and specifically law enforcement. So we also believe that the majority of law enforcement officers are committed to protecting and serving as they are called to do. And their presence in our society is essential to us. Unfortunately, though, we've seen recently that there are cases when things can go awry. And a few weeks ago, Sheriff Coates, you shared in a conversation with Bishop Hinton that it's your goal that whenever there's an interaction between law enforcement and the public personnel and anybody that has to engage with law enforcement, you want everyone to go home safe to their families without any hurt or harm. And this is especially the case concerning the recent events that have been at the forefront of racial equality. Our time together tonight is dedicated to helping achieve that goal, Sheriff Coates. And I'll start with Ms. Marquita McCrimmon. As an educator of citizens interested in criminal justice, what are some of the areas of emphasis that are designed to help equip citizens with the training that allows them to treat all citizens equally?
First, I'd like to say that the students that enter the classroom oftentimes have an interest in law enforcement, the court system, as well as corrections. And what we try to focus on, not so much as training. I think it's more of educating the student. I think training is a specific skill that they've learned when they go into another area. Educating is more expanding the thought process, looking at education, looking at it from different perspectives. And so with that, we always teach an ethics class. And the ethics class are for those, it doesn't matter what you major in. We talk about you being a public servant. And you're called to serve your community. Whether you agree or disagree with laws, policies, or procedure, that you always have to have a higher standard. And we teach that, we emphasize that. We look at, evaluate, and talk about your biases, your perceptions, and how that actually play a part in terms of your decision-making in the criminal justice field. One thing I appreciate, the fact that we have instructors that's coming from various professional backgrounds. And so they do different things in the classrooms with the students. One of the things that I'm really proud of, that we have an instructor that may give the students what we call a self-survey. And the self-survey focuses on your biases, your prejudices. And we talk about how that factor in your decision-making when you become a criminal justice professional. And we really look at that because we know that many of us go into the field because we want to serve our community. And we know that it is a calling. We understand what the laws are. And as we go back to the scriptures, what government require of us. But we talk about discretion. We focus on that, the ethics, the discretion. And they said, well, why are we talking about discretion? Because every component of the criminal justice system, they have discretion that they can use. But we focus on the discretion and how you can overstep your boundaries. And it goes into corruption or abuse of authority. And so those are the things that we really look at within the field. Fortunately, majority of the students, they understand, but there are times that a student come in and they really don't want to hear that conversation. They don't want to hear about biases and abuse of power or the racist things they encounter. And unfortunately, there's been some students that have left the program because that's not what they came in for. They wanted to be trained in a certain area and to go out and perform the duties. So I would say ethics, discretion, abuse of authority, public servant, and call to serve are some things that we emphasize within our program.
Speaking of training, so after that education, they come to you, Sheriff Coates, and so tell us about the certification program that your department is currently undergoing, and the relationship to providing, or its relationship to providing a higher level of service to the citizens of Harnett County.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate this opportunity. And we are in the process now of getting accredited, which is CALEA, and CALEA, what it stands for, is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. It was created in 1979 as a credential authority through joint efforts of law enforcement's major executive associations, and they're made up of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, National Sheriff's Association, and the Police Executive Research Forum. And CALEA is accreditation that means that your agency has demonstrated the compliance with CALEA standards. They have 182 standards, and you have to comply to their standards or you cannot be a member of CALEA. It provides, in CALEA, what it does, it provides the best practices and related to life, health, and safety procedures for your agency. And that was my goal, was to get us accredited. There's more and more agencies getting involved with this because it holds yourself accountable for your actions. And my goal in my future was to make Harnett County the best sheriffs in the state, in the country. And we have done that. We just finished up our assessment with them this past week. And what they do then, they gave us a very favorable recommendation to the commission. So that pretty much, I will be flying down to Arkansas in November to receive our accreditation. They give you 3 years to get it in, and our group has worked tirelessly, and we've done it in 13 months.
Wow.
So that's how dedicated we are to making us a very high standard of law enforcement in this country.
Awesome, awesome. Sergeant Charlene Cotton, one of the things that statistical reports establish is that people of color are stopped disproportionately in comparison to whites. Could you share with us the criteria for making a traffic stop?
Yes, sir. First of all, thanks again for having me. I've never been on a forum or a stage like this before, so it's different for me. So it's taken me a little bit out of my element. So, and I'm happy to do it because I need to do more things like this. So, thank you for the opportunity. First of all, the Highway Patrol, traffic, traffic collisions, traffic stops, abandoned vehicles, pedestrians in the roadway, anything that stops commerce from moving on a roadway, we're involved in. So the first thing that I should let you know is the reason that we are able to make traffic stops is reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion is that we suspect that somebody, either the driver of the vehicle or an occupant of the vehicle or a pedestrian, has been or is actively committing a traffic offense or a crime. So what we do is, after we stop the vehicle, you know, we conduct our business, as we do on the side of the roadway. But we also have, we document every stop that we make. And, our traffic data, including, race, sex, and the reason for stop, is also given to the SBI, and it's in a database, so anybody can look that up. And our command staff routinely checks that data to make sure that we're complying and we're not, you know, disproportionately stopping a certain race or a certain sex and even certain traffic offenses. Because we try to be by the book, and Highway Patrol, we've got a really good high reputation. One of the best in the state, if not the best in the state. Sorry, Sheriff, but one of the best in the country, of course. And we've established that reputation, and we don't want to do anything to go against that. We work really hard for it, and I'm proud to be part of it. I think that's it.
Awesome. As Pastor Fitzpatrick, speaking of those traffic stops, and I've heard some of your presentations when it comes to this subject. What do you believe that all citizens should know when we're having an interaction with law enforcement? As a defense attorney, as a pastor, what are some things that we need to keep in mind?
From which perspective? From the defendant, the person who's maybe being searched, or the officers, or whose perspective? Because each one's a little bit different.
Let's go from the defendant.
Okay, from the defendant, or the soon-to-be, or the accused, or the suspect, or what have you. The goal is, first of all, again, thanks for having me on this awesome, esteemed panel. The goal, of course, is for everyone to come home, not just the driver, not just the occupant, but also the law enforcement agency or the officer that stops them. And what gets in between the ultimate utopia, they going home, is the humanness, the prejudices and biases that many folk have. And because of that, the natural person comes in. So you take anybody who may have a bias or a prejudice, whether it be for a community, whether it be against a particular skin color, a culture, an area, what have you, based on their experiences. All of a sudden now you tackle that in with what power do you have? It's one thing if you have a particular bias in a particular area, what have you, or for a group of people, you have power, but if the same folk who you have a bias against have power, it sort of equals out. But if you don't have power, you're the one who can't say or do anything against the one who has power, who's using their bias. All of a sudden now it causes a different mindset for the one who is driving and getting stopped versus the one who's stopping them. And on the surface, for someone looking through a TV or just listening or watching a YouTube clip, they're sitting back in their room watching this versus being in the actual scenario and know how folk feel. So in the defendant perspective, person gets stopped, they want to make sure that, one, you want to do what you have to do to get home, but there's a lot of steps they want to take, and I've taught some people this and shared them with this just to get them home. Always put your hands on the steering wheel. Tell them beforehand, have your registration card and have your insurance card already on the sunroof. Don't have it in the console. Don't have anything shiny around you. Crack the window down so you can talk to them or what have you. And of course, keep your hands on the steering wheel. Make sure you speak to the officer with respect. And I've told folk many times, in fact, truth be told, some of my clients I do the criminal defense. Some of my clients talk themselves into a charge. And I told them, you talked yourself into that charge. The officer was trying to help you out, but you were so upset about everything else, you let your emotions now override. And also, when you think about was letting you go, but you said, okay, now he's got to charge you. So you have to learn how to respect the officer and let them do their job. Also, I tell folks, I haven't had one client yet in 23 years of practicing criminal defense law. I haven't had one client yet talk an officer out of not charging them with DWI, not charging them with a criminal offense, not charging with weed. Never. They already know what they're going to charge you with. If they have enough proper calls and everything's right, they're going to charge. Well, I want to fuss. It ain't right. Then you throw out laws that aren't right, and you talk yourself into stuff. Just whether it's right or wrong, in your perspective, listen to what the officer is saying. Respect the officer. Yes, sir, no, sir. You can fight in court and get you a lawyer, you do all that stuff. But when you're out there, your goal is to get home. So put your hand on the steering wheel. Yes, sir, no, sir. You know, you don't fight and argue, be combative. That doesn't mean be respectful, but I mean, don't overdo it, because then that raises alarms for the law enforcement officer. In their mind, they come from a different perspective. They want to come home too. And there's an onslaught and a war out there now, you know, and officers want to fight and they want to have bravery. They want to protect where they live, protect their citizens. It's an awesome responsibility. But at the same time, they want to get home to their wives and kids. And they don't want to be ones on statistics who became a victim of just, you know, anger. So they got to protect themselves too. So they have a heightened, you know, awareness. So it's a lot going on with the stop. So I think if everyone would just be calm, you know, and just have a conversation, and if something's not right, deal with it in court. That's the best advice I would give.
Sure.
I'd just like to say what Attorney Fitzpatrick just said. In my conversation with Bishop Hinton a while back, when I did make that comment, our goal is everybody to go home. One of the things in the traffic stops, and of course the Highway Patrol does a lot more than we do, but one of the things that we watch for, like you said, is sudden movement in the car. When we get out and walk up to a car, you know what we've got on us. We don't know what you have on you. So we're watching for sudden movements when we walk up. As you said, have the driver's license registration card. Don't be making quick movements in the car, because that raises a red flag for law enforcement. And the best advice that I give folks when I'm talking with them, and I've been very fortunate to talk at a lot of churches, to the youth group and to the adults, is please don't try your case on the side of the road. You know, we're not perfect. We make mistakes as well. But if you're issued a citation or you're placed under arrest, try it in a courtroom, not on the shoulder of the road. And that's where a lot of things go wrong. And a lot of people don't get to go home to their families. So please, let's try them in court and not on the shoulder of the road. Everybody will go home.
I think it's important in this conversation, hearing from people who are directly involved in law enforcement, because most people watching right now are not. And so being able to hear from the other side of the window and understand what's going on in your mind when you're walking up to, you know, a car, or what are you thinking? And you know, it's not always a bad thing. You know, if we were in your position, we may be thinking the same way. So I think it's good that you bring up those points.
If I could say one thing too, it came just better. One thing I was thinking about before, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. When we do trials, we actually try to pick out jurors. All right, 12 jurors at a jury trial. That'll be fair and impartial, and we'll judge the facts. We always try to figure out who has certain biases and prejudices. It's not always against race. It could be anything. It could be, you know, you like Duke, you like Carolina, and everybody we're dealing with is Carolina folk. You know, there's different biases we all have. And because of that, we try to weed out those who have certain biases or prejudices that can affect the lens that they look at and see the evidence in the case. Both sides, the state and the defense lawyer. And once you weed out those folk, the idea is after screening them, then the defendant will get a fair trial. And that's all that the state of North Carolina wants and the defense counsel wants. I was thinking about it. I think a lot of it also goes back to training, like Sheriff Coates says, having training, a screening process for those who are allowed to be law enforcement officers to find out what biases they have. Certain officers who have history of domestic violence probably shouldn't be allowed to be a police officer, because they're going to go on domestic violence calls, especially if you have convictions for it. So a lot of things you got to weed out. Where do you come from? What's your area? And then holding them accountable is another big thing as well. So the interview part, where it all starts, is a key. Not compromising what's required to allow them to be a police officer, but also holding them accountable makes a big difference too. That's a really huge benefit. Everyone who comes to that car, an officer, a trooper, a sheriff, a city, they all want to come home, but they all have their own natural biases, regardless, their own experiences. Their comrade, fellow trooper, a fellow sheriff, a fellow city police officer may have been a victim of a violent crime last week. That's so now when I'm coming to stop this person, I'm thinking what happened to them. And the person here corporate America. I don't know anything about that. So now you got two different experiences coming together. So it's a lot. So it's about making sure we have the right training on how to, suppress some things that can, or deal with some things that can cause us to not be fair to the person that we're stopping. And on the inside, recognizing that person has their own experiences, how to respect their experiences as well. And the one who's in the car needs to realize the same person did you wrong in your community as a law enforcement officer isn't this person. So learn how to suppress yours down and give everyone a fair chance first. Look at their cues. What are they doing as law enforcement to make you feel funny? If nothing, then relax. So I think we both have to understand the one who's getting stopped and the one doing the stopping. Be fair, be open, honest, respectful, subdue, suppress any biases, give everyone a fair shot, go with your training, go with your experiences, but be safe, and then hopefully everybody will go home.
I would like to also just to comment on the training and also just to clarify a couple of things. The students that we have in our classroom, some of them are already law enforcement officers that have worked several years in their profession, and they're returning to the classroom to get their education, their associate degree. And then we have some that are just starting out getting their associate degree. Those that are not law enforcement officers, there's another step after they finish their associate degree, and they go to go to basic law enforcement training. And that's where a lot of conversations are coming up, because that's where they become, once they pass the state board, to become certified law enforcement officers, and then they're hired for an agency. Some of the current concerns that I have is that when I have a student to come into the classroom and their goal is to become a law enforcement officer, and I walk in the classroom and sometimes they don't know who McCrimmon is gonna be. And so they're expecting a male, or they're expecting someone that's bringing in a certified law enforcement officer that's gonna teach the class. I come from the juvenile justice side. And so when I have a student that turn their chair sideways and don't wanna look at me, and I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Because I'm still in that mode where I'm still a public servant. Doesn't matter that I'm in the classroom. And so I'm watching, I'm saying, why is he not looking at me? So then I go to one of my colleagues that's a law enforcement officer, retired, and I said, are you having these issues with this student? And he said, what are you talking about? He's engaged when I'm teaching. And I said, he won't look at me. And so after about a week or so, he leaves the program. My concern is that if he wants to become a law enforcement officer, he can still do it. All he has to do is to go through basic law enforcement training, and he's out on the street. And so when Pastor Fitzpatrick is talking about additional training before we certify them, some of my colleagues are saying, why don't we have a psychological test done before they go to basic law enforcement training? Those are the things. We know the majority of our officers, they are great. And when I'm having conversations with my faculty, which are great, some are retired chief deputies, been in the force for years. And when we're engaging in conversation, and I understand to support your area, but as an educator, I'm saying, what about the small percentages in those departments? When you say the thin blue line exists, and we cover for them. And so when I look at the small percentage, the student that turned his chair sideways, I don't know where he ended up. Or the kid in the back of the classroom that's saying, when I'm discussing the O.J. Simpson case and issues that came about that investigation, when you're in the classroom and you say, it's okay to say the N-word. And I said, okay, well, your assignment this weekend is to go home and ask your mom and your dad, your grandmother or your grandfather, if it's okay to say the N-word, and report back on Monday morning. And the kid never shows back up. Did he land somewhere in someone's police department? That's the small percentage, because that's not what law enforcement represent. But students say, well, why are you always talking about law enforcement? Well, let's look at the textbook. Let's talk about what we see in the community. they are the first contact a citizen would have to the criminal justice system. We call them the gatekeepers. You can decide, your discretion can decide whether that person entered the criminal justice system. And so there are courageous conversations, but I think it gives you to look at a different perspective as to what another agency or another citizen is coming from. And I think that's the goal, is to really continue to educate and have these conversations.
Man,
Sure.
you make a very valid point, but how would we know if there's a way that you could let an agency, and a lot of times I have hired candidates right while they're still going to school. Recently, I just hired 2 that way. But if there would be a way that question you ask, how they respond back in class, if there would be a way, say, like myself, for instance, I've hired 2, that would be something that would be, if you knew I had hired 2 of those gentlemen, to know what their answer was to that. One of the things my dad always told me, and I do this in my interviews when I'm hiring men, women, is when a man won't look you in the face, that says a lot about him. If the gentleman or the lady's looking all around and I'm asking questions, that throws a red flag up for me. So I understand where you're coming from, and we do a polygraph and a psychological, anybody that's hired at the sheriff's office. If they leave and they're gone a month, when they come back, we give them a polygraph and a psychological. So that question, that would be interesting for sheriffs or police or the highway patrol to know the answer to that question.
And I think what needs to really happen too is during that hiring process, we have to continue to have checks and balances. So that student left the classroom, but no one would contact me. Some officers, some departments will contact me after a student graduated or didn't graduate. But he has the opportunity to go to another community college and go through BLET. Unless they look at his application, no one is going to call. Or there's been officers, you look at someone's background and you see that they've completed an associate degree. And I've had students to say, I'm going to put your name down for reference. I was never called, which if they say they're going to put my name down as a reference, I can pretty much vouch for some of them. But some of them I can't. But those agencies never called me. I had one agency that called me one time, though, and they asked me about a student. And I said, well, he never passed the ethics class. I said he had to repeat that class twice because he could not develop the critical thinking class skills to actually write a paper on an ethical dilemma. And so that agency hired him anyway. And so I guess what we're talking about, more checks and balances between agencies. I think that's good. If if he's coming from your particular area or he's completed a program or whatever. But some students are going to hide that. They may not put that on their resume. And you may not know until you get them into your agency.
Yeah, this is good. This is good. I want to ask, kind of just rolling with that, Sheriff Coates, what do you have in place for Harnett County to detect irresponsible behavior by deputies that work for you?
Well, one of the things I started when I became sheriff that really addresses that, and it's in my policy, is an early warning detective system. And what it is, we have a professional operation officer there, and we take each officer, if he, say for instance in the use of force, if he uses his taser, every month I get a report. If we see one that's used a taser excessive 4 or 5 times, we also look then, because each officer works a section of the county, same section, we'll look at the rest of them and see if he's using a taser or she's using a taser as much as this one officer is, if it's just that certain area, or if he's got a problem. And once it reaches 4 uses of the taser and nobody else is using it there, then, hey, what's going on here? We bring him in, sit down, talk with him, and say, look, what is the problem? Where do you see, and why are you at this point and nobody else is working the same area? So when we get that, we bring them in, we interview them, and then if they need remedial training or whatever, but that's for anything that we have. That early warning detection system was put there for that purpose. So anybody that uses a certain amount of force or pulls their weapon more than anybody else, because each time they pull that weapon or any kind of use of force, it's documented and then turned in each month or each week. And at that time, they are brought in either, and I think that comes into a question later, but that's the system we have in place right now.
Let me ask a similar question to you. What do you have in place as far as the highway patrol?
So as a first sergeant in Harnett County, I'm bound by, all supervisors are bound by our policy to take any complaint filed against one of our troopers seriously, whether it's anonymously or not anonymously. You can, anyone that has an issue can contact a local office or any local highway patrol office. They can also go on online to the highway patrol online and file an anonymous complaint. And each complaint is looked into. It is and like the sheriff was saying, I mean, the highway patrol also has an early warning system to document, keeps track of uses of force, patrol car collisions, patrol car chases. Anything involving uses of force, taser, or physical use of force. A certain amount of those, a threshold, a certain amount of those will do a hit on it and will cause us to bring the trooper in and, like, what's going on, look at his reports, talk to him. We also have, from our supervisors on down to our troopers, everybody has an in-car camera. And those are routinely, and I know the sheriff, they're routinely looked at, not only by us, but our IA section, they can access them as well. So, we have checks and balances in place, like she was talking about, it's all about respect. And I think we've had to have a really high standard on the highway patrol, and I don't want anybody to damage it or tarnish it. And we like to if there are issues, we like to stop it at the lowest level we can. And I'm just piggybacking on some checks and balances that you were talking about, ma'am. And I know I can't speak for all law enforcement agencies, and I know that the sheriff was talking about that they have psychological testing and polygraph. The highway patrol, we go through months and months and months and months once somebody applies. What happened to you in your class, you would have been asked about that. I can almost guarantee it. We go back from each and every job, each and every class, school they went to, and we do a really, really thorough job in our background investigation. Once they send the application in, it goes out to the office, like say somebody applies out of Irwin, it will come to the highway patrol office in Lillington, and either myself or one of my other supervisors, we would go out and interview people like individuals like you, and interview his coaches, interview prior departments that he worked for, interview his classmates, talk to his references. So, and I can't say 100% that would happen, but
Right.
We would have talked to an individual like you on something like that would have happened. And we've got to find issues like that, and we've got to make sure that we address that. And we don't want individuals that have biases like that would come out like that, because then they could come out on the roadway or come out when making contacts with other individuals. So.
And I will say this, that I receive more calls from your department. And you're correct, because if I'm gonna receive a call from someone that's going out into law enforcement, majority of the time, the calls are coming to me from the state troopers. And I'm just being honest about that. And so even if it's a student I don't quite remember, I can go back and look at the profile, or I can call another instructor. But some of the other agencies, I can honestly say I'm not getting that. But from someone that's coming from the state troopers, SBI, state trooper, FBI, I know I'm gonna get, even those that go into different branches of the military, they're gonna go back and ask questions. And that's one of the things that we talk about with the students, about the things that you discuss in the classroom. Those biases, those comments that you make. So when an agency called me and they asked me about, well, what was his views about certain things? And I said, I'm going back to talk about what you was so comfortable with in talking about in the classroom, because it reflects who you are. The problem is that sometimes I don't get that opportunity, or my colleagues don't have the opportunity. I do have the field investigators that would come out to the classroom and say, can we meet? And they may talk with me and a couple of other instructors. But for some agencies, and I think that's where you have the opportunity, the hiring procedures are different, where one agency locally may say, I don't want this officer, but he may go to the next area and that agency may bring him in, because everybody have different levels of expectations. And I think it's not a set roadmap. And I think when we're talking about the psychological evaluations, we're kind of talking about, we know they happen at the agency once they get ready to be hired. What I'm talking about, and what some of my other colleagues, those that have years of law enforcement experience, they're saying we need to do more before they even get into BLAT. And that will help weed out some of that issues there at that end, instead of letting them go through BLAT without that psychological or several different testing, and then they make it through. I think that's the way to be able to close the gate kind of at the early stages of it. Thank you.
Wow. And I'll mention this just because you're mentioning something even in your classroom, creating these environments where people feel comfortable. Pastor Fitzpatrick was talking earlier about we all have implicit bias. We all have it. We all have these unconscious things that we believe, and sometimes we don't even know it's there. It's based off experience, it's based off upbringing, whatever the case may be, but we have it. And having a place where we can get comfortable enough where that stuff can surface. And I think it's important to know that in the classroom, you know, the instructors are trying to create this environment where, you know, it comes up. And hopefully, you know, even after hiring, you know, those types of conversations are happening so that we can uncover those things that may be under the surface. It's not always intentional. It's there though. For some people, it's just there. And so I want to shift gears a bit, and I want to talk to you, Sheriff Costa, about the Citizens Academy. Can you talk about what that is and what you do with that?
Sure. And that's probably one of my biggest things that I like the most about the sheriff's office. What I wanted to do was give the citizens of this county an opportunity to see what a deputy does in his daily job, other than see us ride around for 12 hours. That's what they see. So what I did, and I'll be honest, I wish I could take credit for the program, but Sheriff Ingram in Brunswick County, I went down there and spoke with him when I heard about his program. And so we went down there, and I took my staff, I took my commissioners. I told them what I wanted to do. And I took them down there and showed them the program, what I had as a future for Harnett County. And in the Citizens Academy, we select 20 to 25 people. Doesn't matter. You can be, we've had husband and wives, we've had ministers. A couple of my commissioners went through the program. But before you can get in the program, we do a light background check on you, like in a pistol permit that sort of thing, because we just don't want anybody and everybody in there, for obvious reasons, because we show everything, what the detectives, how they do their job. But I wanted the community, it's a community outreach program to see what we do as law enforcement and give them a different perspective of us. So we do it for 12 weeks. It's every Tuesday night for 12 weeks. One night, the detective will put on the program. And what they do, they will tell you from the time that a incident's taken place, if somebody's had a larceny, they go through how, from the time they get it, to how they work that case, how people are interviewed, the next step. The next Tuesday night, the telecommunications will put on the program, how they handle the calls that come in. The narcotics division puts on the program. Every department in our sheriff's office, it's about 3 hours a night, believe it or not. And I read the evaluations the next day from what the students had to say. And everybody, it was telecommunications first. They were more involved with that and the jail. So we had to extend that program because it was 10 nights so that they could spend more time in communication. So that made it 12 weeks. And it's done exactly what I wanted it to do. Everybody, when they graduated from that class, at the end of the class, you get a certificate. You also get a shirt, Citizens Academy graduate. And everybody has been so, we do the shoot, don't shoot scenario where a law enforcement officer has to make that split-second decision. And then attorneys get 6 months to a year to say why we shouldn't have made that split-second decision. And then they actually see that, and we let them do it. We put them in that seat with a weapon, which is gas-operated, and they have to make that decision. Some of them made very poor decisions. One lady went through it. She shot everybody. The judge, the district attorney, I asked her, I said, Sheriff, what were you thinking? She said, I left no doubt. But when they left there, it's amazing to read what they had to say about this class. Some of them wanted to go back through it again. And what really is motivated us is we do 2 classes a year. And before that first class is finished, the next one is already full. So they're waiting, word of mouth, and they're just so amazed at what we go through. And it's been a huge success. And it's amazing what it did. I knew what it would do, or I felt like I did, and it's done exactly that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I do want to ask Pastor Fitzpatrick, can you talk, to put on your legal hat? I know you don't take it off often, but I want you to talk to those, just kind of piggybacking off of this citizens education. What should people, as far as our legal rights, when we're engaging with officers, what are some things we need to know from a defense attorney's perspective?
Sure. One thing I was going to say, Sheriff Coates was describing that program. I was thinking maybe some of the recruits can go through that particular course, and then if they start shooting everybody, weed that person out, weed that, he'll make it a B-led, and weed them out.
They've actually gone through the simulator?
Huh?
They have actually gone through one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Look at those stats. Yeah. They're killing everybody, maybe.
No, they got shot.
Okay. Maybe they shouldn't be. But from a legal standpoint, their rights are to be free from unreasonable search and seizures. That law enforcement officers should not be stopping them haphazardly or just because of whatever reason they want to. It needs to be for some reasonable suspicion, as Trooper Cotton has indicated. So I think they have to understand they have a right, of course, first of all. What they don't have a right to is tell the officer, you got to tell me this, I'm not doing anything. You have to follow the instructions, because now you could be charged with resisting. And that gets into a whole different ballgame. If you resist, then they can pull you out. Now, if you resist that, you can be, So you want to make sure that you at least follow the commands and requests of the officer. But you have a right, of course, to, North Carolina's still on the border now. A lot of states are allowing you to record everything with your phone and also cannot take your phone. North Carolina's been, because they're kind of conservative, but they've been whiffing and waffling with that. So a lot of people are saying, I have a right to record you, I have a right to record you. And officers will tell them take it off or cut it off, or they'll take the phone, particularly in Durham, take the phone and get rid of it. And I have one officer take and delete stuff. I mean, it's amazing. But so, I don't say you have a right to that at this point, to do that. You can do it and hope that nothing happens, but something does happen, then bring that up in court. But of course, you have a right to pull over. This is something I taught a lot of defendants, and it hasn't burnt me yet, and this is what I would do, because I've been a victim of profiling and been stopped and all of that stuff before. Is when you drive, I don't pull over in a quiet place, dark place. It's not going to happen. Nope. I'm going to drive till I see some bright lights, a gas station where I know there's cameras. That's just reality. So I tell folk, drive to a safe place. Now, you can't drive 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, you need to go to the next reasonable spot you see, that has lights. Going to your house 40 minutes away is not, no, that's not what I'm talking about. You have to find the reasonable. And they define reasonable, so not like 1 to 3 miles. They actually say 1 mile is reasonable, but it just depends on, where you're going to be safe. And I tell folk, too, when you do drive to that safe place, if you back in the country somewhere and it just is nothing, then what I tell them to do is put the hazard lights on and call 911. And I say, tell them, hey, it's emergency, because I'm being followed by an officer now. I don't know where I'm at, but I'm not pulling over this dark place. So let them know the road is Buckhorn, Duncan Road, and I'm driving. I'm going to get you a nearer. So let them know I'm not running. That helps you with the fleeing to elude issue. I'm not running. I'm not speeding. I'm just driving to a safe place. That way, communication knows how to relate to the person behind. Hey, they already contacted us. They're not fleeing to elude. Then I tell them keep that phone on the whole time while you are driving. So then that way they hear what's happening. So when you do stop, tell them I'm stopping now at Exxon, and I'm fine. I'm not going to resist. I'm here. I'm being respectful. And that's just another protection I tell them to put in place for. But they got a right to be, there, to be, not even right to be heard, really. You got to really listen. You got to listen to those of a power at that particular time. But at the end of the day, the question is, how do you protect those rights? And unfortunately, you cannot protect them so much while you're out there because you don't have the power. So yes, you have a right to not have unreasonable search and seizures, but at the end of the day, if you tell them they can't search and they do it anyhow, you can't fight the officer and tell them, no, you can't do it. They have the power. You have to just document, I'm saying, no, you can't search. They're going to search anyway, let them do it. Come see us, and we'll fight it out legally in court about how they should not have done that. So really, you have to submit at the end of the day, barring it being something so egregious. You have to submit and be respectful, and we'll deal with it in court.
Yeah, awesome. Sheriff Coates, one area where things can go terribly wrong is responding to domestic violence calls. What are some guidelines given to deputies to support the best outcome possible for every party involved?
Well, and you're right, domestic violence is a serious problem, and I want to elaborate a little bit. And I was hired years ago. I've worked for 4 sheriffs, but when I first came here in the early 70s, one of the things when I was hired was the sheriff said, okay, you do not interfere with a man and his wife. That is a no-no. But this was years ago before the law changed. We served papers, and that was it. So things have changed, but domestic violence is the most dangerous call that a deputy goes to. Recent incidents we've seen where they got out of the car and were shot before they got there. A lot of that, sometimes deputies, highway patrol, of course, I don't think, they help us a lot in domestic, and we appreciate it. But when we go up there sometimes, and we try to teach this and have meetings regular, don't get complacent. When you pull up and you know it's a domestic call, use your training. Don't walk up to the front door. Walk up and listen before you knock on that door. Be alert before you ever walk up to the door, watching windows, curtains, anything. Because that's where, in the first few minutes, if the man's made up his mind, and a lot of times they'll tell dispatcher, he said if law enforcement comes, he's going to kill them. That's a red flag there. Hey, when you get there, park, don't pull right up in the driveway. Park somewhere else and ease up there. Because if a man's made up his mind and he knows his spouse has called the sheriff's office, I know I'm going to jail. And you can hear it, the dispatchers hear it in the background. The dispatchers relay a lot of information to us because they hear it on the phone. And they'll say, look, there's a commotion in the background. You hear them threatening. So it goes back to our training on how and what to do. Now, once you get there, that's when you got to separate the parties. Get them in separate rooms. We have multiple officers that goes to domestic. So get them separated, find out what's going on. A lot of times the woman calls, get there, and it is the woman beating the man. We've had that. But those are things that we have to watch for and go back on our training that we learned in BLET. But again, at the end of the day, somebody's going to go to jail more than likely in a domestic violence. But he might not be going to the home he wants to go to, but at least he's going home, and he'll make bond the next day or in the 48 hours. But, you know, we got to do our part in de-escalating the problem when you get there. Separate them, find out what's going on. If you've determined there's going to be an arrest or you take them before the magistrate, don't sit there and argue with them. You're in control, and let them have their day in court.
Absolutely.
I can say something about that too. First of all, domestic violence investigations, it takes a special trained law enforcement officers because if they've been through it a lot, they've been trained, there's special classes you go to and all of that, the cues they look for. So a lot of agencies have special trained law enforcement officers to look for certain things when they go in there. So that's always helpful. But it also goes back to those biases as well. If you have somebody on there who's been a victim of that themselves, then the lens of that they see through it, yeah, I can follow the rules. Yep, I'll be fair. Yep, I'll be impartial. Yep. When they get there, they're going to see, wait a minute, I remember that happened to me. You know, so you have to, again, goes back to the beginning, screening out those who you do allow to be in that particular role. But a lot of times I found, even in domestic violence cases in particular, is when officers get there, the more experienced they are, the better case is the DA and I like to work with, because an experienced DV officer knows, okay, this is a bunch of mess. No, I can't tell both of y'all lie. You know, they know it's real, but a rookie lawyer don't know better. He said this, must be true. So then you have to deal with extra stuff. He gets locked up. She may have lied on him. Now he going to jail, cooling off period for something he didn't do. Now he really mad when he get, you know, so it just, and then she said, I was upset because you dated my cousin. Now, I want to get you out now. And she calling us. I was lying. So we got to call the DA. She said she was lying. So then the DA has to decide, was she really lying? Was she not lying? So you have to call the officer. Officers say, well, I don't know. I think she said it happened. So it just gets into a cycle. Now it's on his record for being arrested for domestic violence. Yes, it gets dismissed, but it's there. And it was a lie. Sometimes it be true, but I'm saying the DA and the law enforcement have to make tough decisions on what is true and how to proceed forward before it even gets to the judge. So it takes a lot of responsibility and boldness to make that decision happen. Wow. I found that to be very, very profound.
And if I can follow up, one of the things that we do, all of our officers have been trained in crisis intervention, because a lot of times we get to a domestic, and in your training, you can tell if he's going through a mental state. And we have had that to happen. And that's where our mental health system has failed us big time. The easiest way that the courts, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, is because we don't have the facilities for them. They put them in jail. And that's not where they belong. They need help. But unfortunately, that's where they end up, and that's where our mental health has failed us. But all of our officers are trained in crisis intervention. So especially at the domestic, that's when it really pays, when you've got two there.
Yes, yes. Let me ask Sergeant Cotton on the Highway Patrol end, what tools and techniques do you have for de-escalation?
So like I tell all my troopers, and especially new troopers to the district, I think the best weapon I have on me is not around my belt, it's my mouth. I'm telling you, it is my best weapon, whether, especially as a law enforcement officer, and it's just as a person. I mean, he pointed out earlier, you can You know, you talk yourself into a lot of things, you talk yourself out of a lot of things. I mean, you can. And I think I take pride as someone who I feel like I can communicate pretty well with people in the public. I can. They call the office, and it's easy for me to talk to them. May not be as easy as on a stage like this for me to communicate, but I like talking to people. I like talking to interested applicants. I love talking to people who have concerns. So I'm always open to listen to what people have to say, and that helps us in our training. We go through, not only do we go through firearms training and yearly driving training and hazmat training. I mean, the list goes on and on. We train year round. We also have de-escalation training, diversity training. So we're really, I mean, we pride ourselves on our training, and our Colonel Glenn McNeil, he wants us to be well-trained, and we are a well-oiled machine. And I can tell you that and I know he probably deals with a lot of troopers in Durham, and you know, we have really good reputations throughout the state. So, but we could be trained more, and we will be trained more. And you know, we need to. Some of us old heads are on our way out the door. I mean, there's a new breed of law enforcement officers that are coming up, and the new millennials. So we need to make sure that they're trained just as well as we are, and not drop the ball.
Absolutely, absolutely. Such important work that law enforcement officers do, and so it's really important that these conversations are had. I'll say this: I've had situations. Speaking of de-escalation, you know, I've had situations. I've been stopped a few times, and so I've had situations where officers were, as you're describing, extremely courteous and, you know, just wanted to, you know, tell me my tail light was out. And then I've also had situations where I was nervous, and you know, I mean, should I feel that nervous with someone who's supposed to be protecting me? I don't know, but I've had moments where I felt nervous, and so to that, I want to ask both of you, Sheriff Coates first, if someone feels like they were treated improperly in an interaction with law enforcement, what is the procedure in Harnett County? And then, will the citizen get a report? What actions are going to come of it? Just kind of give us an idea of what that process looks like.
One of the things we've implemented, and this was before CALEA, before we started that process, is, you know, in the past, you know, some of the sheriffs in the past, if a person didn't come up there and filed a complaint in person, some of them didn't feel like that was a legitimate complaint if they're not willing to come up there and file in person. So what we've done, you can do it by phone, you can do it on email, you can, any way you want to file that complaint. We have a system in place through our lieutenant, and we take every complaint. As the first sergeant said, we take all of them serious. Now, you're going to get some complaints, and we investigate them starting at the supervisor level. And then it goes up the chain of command, and they do the investigation. And the end, in the form, it'll say whether it was substantiated or unfounded. But we always call the person back, and we'll send them that letter. But now, as far as what we do with them, if we substantiate that it was a legitimate complaint, it's handled internal. If it's minor, it's handled internal, and we're not going to discuss what their if they had to be reprimanded, whatever the punishment is, but they're brought in for remedial training. So, but as far as if you filed a complaint, we're not going to tell you what was done to them. It was substantiated, and I promise you, as the sheriff of Harnett County, it will be handled But you will receive a letter that it was substantiated. This officer was, disciplinary actions were taken, and that's as far as we'll go into the personnel issue.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So, the same as what the sheriff says, we take all complaints, seriously. It's investigated thoroughly, whether it's, emailed, online through the Highway Patrol website or, telephone, call, or somebody just comes to the office. I take them all seriously, and all supervisors on Highway Patrol do. I mean, we're bound to take them seriously. They are, they're investigated thoroughly. Depending on what the level of the complaint is, if it's the only time an individual that you will find out what happened to the complaint or how we handled it, whether it was mediation or whether they were given time off or just canceled. That's state personal law. For the state personal law, you're not going to know that unless it's a violation of state law. If it's if it's part of the personnel law, then we just handle it internally, and you're not going to know that. But you will, like the sheriff said, you will be notified that we've handled it. Do you have any more questions? Do you have any more concerns? How they were reprimanded or what happened at the end of the investigation, you won't find out about that.
Okay. I want to.
I got to address something on there, and I'm glad you guys brought this question up because there's three things that are a challenge with the process, I believe, that across the state law enforcement agencies use, and you all hit it on the head. You notice that, both you do more than what I've had other law enforcement agencies do. Clients, I tell them to go file a complaint with the officer. And I talk to some IA officers that I know and respect, one of my best friends as an officer. So they actually do thoroughly investigate. So that part I think is true. I think where the system fails and the law sort of holds them back a little bit is the second part. The second part is, ma'am, we heard your complaint. We received your complaint. Thank you for your complaint. We're going to look into this. So yes, all right. Second part is, now when it's over, what happened? The second part doesn't get fully done unless it's unsubstantiated. Like Sheriff just says, if it's not substantiated, they let them know, hey, it's not substantiated. So now they feeling like, okay, why not? Even then, they won't go into well, I can't say what you all do, but a lot of times not explain why not. We're just telling you that we did our investigation and found unsubstantiated. So now it's like, listen to my word, you trust in them, it's an in-house thing. Number two, if you do substantiate it, a lot of agencies don't tell you why. I mean, what they found, it's just, yes, you're right, they messed up. We'll take care of it in-house. Now, unless you got a relationship with that sheriff or respect your sheriff and trust their word like that, that's not going to mean a whole lot to that person because now you all working together is the mindset of the people. So now we're saying, you all handling it, well, handle it. How'd you handle it? Well, we can't tell you because of personnel laws. But if what the officer did is against the law, then he should be prosecuted. So that I should see something where he's charged or she's charged. But oftentimes that doesn't happen. It gets, from the outside view, seemingly swept underneath the rug because we handling it just could be, don't do it again. So the concerned citizen does not feel that they were vindicated, any kind of trust. So it puts the law enforcement in a pickle because they can't violate personnel laws, again, unless the person did violate a law, which sometimes they did do, which is why the complaint came in the first place. But rather than who wants to say, yes, you violate the law, fire you and charge you as a regular routine if it's wrong. It doesn't happen. So then the concerned citizen sits back thinking their voice isn't heard. So when something else bad happens in their house or bad happens with police officers, they ain't gonna say nothing. Well, y'all ain't gonna do nothing. And then it's a cycle goes on and on and on. The officers know if they were substantiated, nothing happened to them. Okay, desk job for 10 days. Okay, I'm back. Okay, whatever. So then they're gonna keep going by, drive by, the concerned person sees that same officer riding by, like, there you go, he's still on the job, but yet you don't call me this, you don't call me that, you did this to me, you threw me down, said you're untouchable, and now it seems like you're right. So the impression now, and no fault of those who have authority, but the impression now is, why complain? It's not gonna make a difference. And that's the tough part about it, not getting that second part. I think if there was something there that says, yes, like Sheriff says, we looked into it, and we've dealt with him or her, and we're on top of it. I think it depends on how egregious the concern was that it was related to them in the first place, because then they feel left out. Second thing is, when they actually do get a report, it is substantiated. I had the same trooper actually, after he was reported on, stop my client a week later, same area for a stop. He and his boys, they all got out. The other troopers did the talking to the person, and my client's just there, letting it be known. So you gonna take a report out on me, literally, word for word. He said, look, you know it won't like that, but I'm gonna let you say your report and go through the process. Now client's thinking, what happened to what if he take me out, I'm done. So now they don't feel like they were protected because the other troopers that were with him did a lot of the talking after that. But the intimidation factor was there, so you took a report on me. Oh, okay. So the other boys do all the talking, all the searching in the car, didn't find nothing, but just slow down, you're speaking too fast. And let him go. We did reports, went to the next level. Supervisor of that trooper said he'd look into the video, get back with us. Didn't really happen. And things just went south for that, just about 2 or 3 years ago. So because of that, again, this is a man who had no record. But the taste in his mouth is like, the system is messed up. So if you complain, you get burnt. They know about it. If you don't complain about it, they have power over you. So I think that's a dilemma we have to deal with as well, which goes back to respect factor. Like Sheriff Coachman tell me now, I'm gonna take care of it. I'm gonna believe him because I know him. I trust him. I know his heart. I'm gonna believe him. But everybody don't have that relationship with the sheriff. So then they're gonna just see, okay, you're gonna do the same thing, swipe beneath the rug, and then sure enough, in their perspective, that's how it seems to be. So I wish we could have some accountability or some kind of exposure to say what happened, but
Wow.
you can't.
Sheriff Coates.
One of the things the pastor, he referred to, and he's right, they don't know, but one incident, and this is just one incident, if there was 2 people in the car and they filed a complaint, the driver say, and the passenger, when we do our background and that investigation, you get that person by themselves, they say, it didn't happen that way. Well, you can't tell, that's another reason we can't tell why it was not substantiated, because next thing you know, you've got somebody killed. They go back and kill the person saying, you told them nothing happened. So there's a lot of things, and like you said, I wish there was another step, but unfortunately there's not. Now, in our internal investigations, and just like with the Highway Patrol, if it's bad enough, when it gets to me and I see all of them, you know, at the end of the day, it falls on Sheriff Wayne Coates, the decision that's going to be made. And if I think that it warrants criminal, I'm going to bring the DA down and the SBI, and I've done that in the past, because I want that transparency. Now, I'm not going to call the SBI on just because the way the officer talked with them, but if I think there's criminal intent there, I don't want anybody to think that we have a corrupt sheriff's office. We don't operate that way. We're never going to operate that way. So, you know, it don't bother me. I've got Mike Denning on speed dial. If I need him, he's there, which is a supervisor for the SBI. But you're right, Pastor. I wish there was another step, because at the end of the day, it goes back trust. And that's what I tell these folks when I'm have meetings with them. We got to trust in our community, but our community's got to trust in us.
Only thing I got to add is I 100% agree with what he said.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
And those reports aren't kept.
Not
Those
saying
reports-
anybody's trying to hide anything, but I
Right.
wish that for the trust of the communities, I wish it was.
Right.
And I
And
think
no-
the sheriff agrees that too.
And hearing why it's not, it is important as well for those who are sending in complaints.
Not because we
knowing-
don't want to tell
Exactly.
you, we're not allowed to do.
And if it's kept, the records are kept in the report. That's the other question they don't know, because there's officers I know in the past who kept getting complaints. They were known for getting complaints, and they were legitimate complaints. But the person kept working for a while. So I'm thinking, if he transferred from the city to the sheriff, didn't he see what was written in? But I don't know, is it written in the report? Are certain reprimands not recorded so it doesn't follow them? I don't know. Do all the reprimands, it doesn't even show on their employee record, you've had 20 people complain about you, or is it doesn't show anything? If it's unsubstantiated, is it wiped away? I don't know.
No, in ours, it's put in any counseling, written reprimand is put in their personnel file. Now, when if they go to another agency or whatever, they get the authorization of release from the, say for instance, one of my deputies left here and went to Brunswick County. If they wanted to call and come up here and see his internal file, they have to get his written permission, and then it's brought up with their investigator to look at and see the personnel file.
The
But
one who got in
anybody-
trouble has to give them permission to see he got in trouble.
Yes.
I wouldn't
If-
sign it.
If
let
he
him
don't
see it.
want to sign that authorization, that ought to be a red flag right there for the agency.
But that goes back to what you were saying. If they don't communicate, then he may not know. But that's a
But
red
then-
flag. No, I don't look at my report. You're right.
But then also, the seriousness of that is that it tarnishes the reputation of law enforcement. That is the conversations that I'm having with my law enforcement colleagues that I've been knowing for 20 years. It's saying those incidents like that is why the community look at law enforcement in a negative light. And we're saying in the classroom, just because you can, don't mean that you should. Because you have that discretion, doesn't mean that you have to take it to that level. You may be able to say certain things to that citizen, but at the end of the day, you're tarnishing the reputation of law enforcement. And maybe it didn't happen in your department. Because it happened somewhere else, it still has looked upon a negativity towards law enforcement. And I think that's what we really have to look at, because we want to know, why are the citizens saying these things? Because those small issues that legally they had the authority to do, but it's tarnishing their reputation.
Wow. Well, I'd love, because there are a lot of issues here. We can probably sit here and talk for hours and hours. And so, but we're going to wrap up here, because I just really think that this is good stuff. But I want each of you, and just 1 minute or less, I want you to give some suggestions that you'd offer to get us to this goal that Sheriff Coates and I believe Sergeant Cotton have, and all good law enforcement, this goal for law enforcement and citizens to get home safe with no harm. What are some suggestions that could get us to that place? We'll start with Ms. Marquita.
I'm a big proponent of community policing. And I think when we listen and hear things in the social media and the news, we're talking about building that community policing concept, is that the community have to feel like they are also a part of the law enforcement community as well. And so what you're doing with the community policing, partnering with agencies and things like that, I think it's important that you continue to build on that. The citizens need to know that they have trust in the law enforcement agency. If we go back, remember I'm an educator, if I go back to the philosophy or the history of the sheriff, and before there was an organized sheriff's department, who helped to control the crime in the community? It was the citizens. And then when they had an organized department and it was the sheriff, he still had to rely on the citizens for enforcement. And so I think the citizens need to be a part to help to protect the community. And so when I say the community, we're talking about every area that looks like the community. If it's the western part of the community, if it's this Harnett Central side, well, we got to make sure that we build into the community policing that reflects the community. When I think about Bishop Clarida, Pastor Hinton, Pastor Wagner, when they decided to, hey, let's put this together, the parade, the courageous conversation, that's actually community policing that's being birthed out of the church. So it kind of shows us that it's a new climate and that the church has taken a stand. And so with that, not just Sheriff Coates, but every agency have to look at and say, how can we continue to implement community policing that the citizens feel like they're a part of? Because the citizens help protect your people. If you go to a community and they know and they have a relationship with that agency, they feel comfortable in knowing it's not always coming out here for enforcement. Because sometimes traditional policing is not even needed. It's just that communication, that talking. And then another thing, I said the community policing philosophy, to build on that. And we need to sometimes see that, you know, social media is a big thing. You know, Facebook, whatever you're doing in your community, let the community see it. They're always on Facebook looking at things, and that helps to build that trust. And then another thing is that we have to look at the issues when we have officers that are always using excessive force, because those kind of officers also put their colleagues in danger. Because if you have this partner and they're always aggressive and they're quick to use their taser, if you're going out and they're always at a level 3 or 5 when their interaction with the community, then it put that other colleague that have those skills or want to communicate. So we got to make sure that we handle those officers in-house, because they are the ones that's kind of tarnishing the reputation of the majority of the good officers.
Sheriff Coates?
I got about 3 things here.
Okay.
First of all, it starts at home. And I'll use this as an example. When I was younger, on Channel 5, at 10:59 at night, there used to be a clock that would show up on TV, and it would say, it's 11 o'clock, where are your children? 40% of this country can't tell you where their 11-year-old is 11 o'clock at night. If you want to make sure that he's home safe and he's not laying in a ditch dead somewhere, or he's not locked up, know where your child is at night. Second is respect. Everybody needs to respect each other. If you don't have respect, you're in trouble. If you don't have God in your life, you're in trouble. And then the last is trust. You know, there's a few bad apples in everything. I told Bishop Hinton and Bishop Clarity and Bishop McCoy in my office when we were starting the caravan, I said, you know, you got to trust everybody. And for us to go home at night, everybody is trust and respect. Trust and respect. And I will, the peaceful, I hate to use the word protest. The peaceful gatherings that we had was all because it was well organized. We had the community leaders. We had Bishop Hinton. We had Pastor Wagner. At these meetings or at these marches before they ever started, and there was a respect with everybody there. And that's the reason they were so peaceful. We got good people in this county. Now, we got some repeat offenders. Help keep you in business, Pastor. But you know, we showed what Harnett County is when we had all the, and I think there were 7 of them, and I was able to make all of them except one, and that was an emergency. I couldn't be there. But the community leaders is what we've got to really count on and trust in each other.
Sergeant Cox?
So I love the words trust and respect, because I try to take you to a place like, say, I stop a vehicle, and I'm going to trust the person in that vehicle that he's going to let me or she's going to let me go up there and do my job. They need to trust me that I'm going to do my job the way I'm supposed to do it. And I need to, when I get up there to do my job, I need to respect them. And they need to respect me. That way, everybody can go home. It's nothing personal when we make contacts with individuals on the roadway. it's our job. It's what we were trained to do, and it's our calling. Each of us on here, we have a job, and it's just, I just wear a gun and a badge. I mean, that's my job. There's a lot of responsibility for what I do, a lot, and I don't take it lightly. And I love what the sheriff is doing with the civilian deputy class. That citizen, yeah, that's awesome. The Highway Patrol, we also have we've got high school internships going on where we can bring in individuals that could possibly are looking for a career in law enforcement, not just as a state trooper, but for a deputy or a police officer. We also have a junior trooper school, which is awesome, at our Highway Patrol Academy. It's normally held a week in the summer, and the kids love it. I mean, it shows they stay at the academy, they get up and they run and they do all the fun stuff that we get to do for 9 months there, but they only do it in a week. So, but we're always looking for qualified individuals to fill the ranks because, we, like you said, I mean, we're going to need law enforcement, and there are really good applicants in this community. I love Harney County. They're really good. I mean, I try to tell people if you want to see some change in the community, be part of the change. I mean, look into applying with the Highway Patrol. Look into applying with the Sheriff's Department. It's a great opportunity to serve, and there are a lot of good individuals that are in law enforcement, and I'm proud to do what I do, and thank you, Sheriff, for always assisting the Highway Patrol. Your men and women are awesome. We wouldn't be able to do what we do. There's so few of us in the county, we wouldn't be able to do what we need to do in our investigation. So I just wanted a little shout out to the Sheriff for the assistance that he gives us on a day-to-day basis. So, thank you.
Thank you, and same here, because out in the county, the Highway Patrol is limited how many they have, we're limited how we have, so we count on each other. And Colonel McNeil and I are good friends, so I don't think if he watches this, he'll mind what I say. They have actually helped us in times when we were behind in calls, and they have picked up calls for us, and I greatly appreciate that.
Awesome. Pastor Fitzpatrick.
Sure. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be on this awesome panel. I would say certainly there's a couple of C's. I would say one, community involvement is very important. If you're involved in the community and they see you, then they can relate to you. Not only the sheriff, not only the trooper, but other troopers and other deputies. I mean, just out in the community, just doing things, just fun, So that way it's not a barrier so much. And sometimes you get relationships built up through community involvement. So we'll talk to you and tell you what's going on. But they won't ever share and do community policing if they feel like they're not being heard. So that goes back to the communication piece. In order to be community involved, you have to have effective communication. So I think that'll be an awesome step for law enforcement everywhere to communicate effectively to the community, let them know that their voices are heard, and explain things like we're doing now. People don't understand, like you said, I cannot tell you why this person, how they got, well, what was the punishment? I can't tell you, this is why. That goes a long way. Then they can say, oh, that is true. It's a law. State privacy law says this, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Versus they won't respond to me. So I think communication is really important because it doesn't do the justice that the law enforcement is doing a great job. It makes it seem like they're not, and they really are. So I think communication is important. I think education is very important as well. Educating the community about what is right, what is not right, what is allowed. Even when it comes to the community involvement, when it comes to the communication, you can have town hall meetings. You can have meetings every 2-3 months where folk can come to a nice, safe place. Officers are dressed down or dressed up, doesn't matter, and just talk, have a panel, talk, they go to the microphone, have to get the answers in advance, questions in advance, and let's answer them so everybody can hear in a form and fashion way. That gets rid of the barrier as well. I also think education comes into play with accountability. I think officers should have accountability. I believe that, if you have a partner on your team, if one of y'all cut up, you're both getting in trouble. My dad did it for me and my sister, and he do it now for my daughter and my son. You gonna tell him, okay, you getting in trouble? Both of y'all get it, but he did it. You shouldn't let him do it. And from that point on, it's Trey, stop doing that. You ain't get me in trouble. Stop doing that. It makes a difference because it's accountability for both. So I think, if one says, I'm not going to do this person wrong, you may, but now he's going to think, hold on, I'm getting in trouble too. So either he gonna collude with them to do it, or say, no, I'm not getting in trouble for you. I got a family to get to, and tell it, which keeps this one at bay. So that's an accountability thing I believe that's important for law enforcement to have. And then, of course, the last one is with education, racial sensitivity. I think we need to have more classes. I don't know if Kalia offers that. Kalia, is that Kalia, right?
We do that. We do that in our training, in our, what we have to do every year. We do that. And that, you're right, that's a big, important part.
Right. And a lot of law enforcement agents aren't doing it, or they're doing an hour, for the year. Do my 1 hour for the year. We did a racial sense. No. If you're serious about this thing, make it every quarter. And then even when you talk about coming to the interviewing, whatever, if they interview at for the sheriffs or for the city officers, whatever, and they don't see anybody who looks like you, then the cues won't be shown to the interviewer. Because then if they come in and see somebody look like you and they turn their chair, then the interviewer is going to know, okay, already red flag. Whether he calls and speak to those in, your section or not, he going to see or she going to see the cues. But if they see everybody who looks like them and acts like them all the time, then they're going to say, okay, we're the same. So I think we all have to have accountability to make sure we have the best people in place, whatever it takes, and hold them accountable if they do wrong.
And if I'm sorry.
You go right ahead.
Okay, and that was some of the conversations that we've been having in my area. It's talking about diversity, and to not always have a law enforcement officer to conduct the training. Because when you bring someone in with a different perception, when I'm teaching, I come from the juvenile justice side. So when I'm talking to a law enforcement officer about juvenile justice, I'm bringing a different perception as to how, from our end of the interaction with that juvenile. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago when we had a lot of petitions and things that was coming out of the counties, and they were school resource officers. Well, one particular night we had offered a class, the majority of the students were school resource officers, law enforcement officers. So I had a chance to go in to teach that class that semester. And so what happened, we had a chance to go through the entire juvenile justice court process. Because they was just trained, probably 3 hours in basic law enforcement training to how to do the petitions. But once we went through the court process of what happens to that petition after they fill it out, they had a different perception, because we did a risk and needs assessment of what would be done to look at that child and what were the needs of the child. And then some of the officers said, you know what, I'm gonna pretend I'm the child. And I'm gonna do this assessment based on my childhood. And so I'm walking by the class and I'm seeing these high numbers. I was like, whose numbers are those? They're saying they're mine. And when they were a child. And so we went through that. And then we talked about, well, what are the needs of that particular child? And then we talked about what happens once that child goes to court and what is done, the adjudication and disposition. So then you had officers thinking, I can still do my job, but I have a different perspective about that particular child, and I may look at something besides filing a petition, I may do something a little bit different. And so that's what we're talking about, the training, but not be so quick to always align those trainings up with fellow officers, to bring someone with a different perspective.
Wow, these were all powerful points. And oh, I'm sorry.
One of the most frustrating things from a law enforcement officer standpoint lately is folks are talking about the country defunding the police. Now, they talk about defunding police and more training. They want us to be better trained. Well, if you take the money away, where are you going to go to get your training? It takes money for these instructors. So that is frustrating to me as a law enforcement officer. And at the sheriff's office, we do double, sometimes triple the amount of training that the state requires. But when you hear these folks talk about defund the police department, well, that's where you got to spend your money for your training that they're wanting us to get. So that is frustrating to me, not just as a sheriff, but as a law enforcement officer. So people really need to think about opening that mouth before their brain goes into effect. You got to have training if you want us to be better.
Powerful and just interesting to hear all of these perspectives tonight. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and I just expect God to do continue to do great things as we move forward. If you have questions, if you have some thoughts that you like to present as we continue this conversation, put those in the comments, send us a message, email us, whatever, so that we can continue this conversation forward. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time for Courageous Conversations.